Konsa to Arsenal, here we go. And honestly, this transfer has had a lot of different opinions. A lot of people like it, a lot of people don't like it, and for various different reasons. And so for me, it's been very interesting because look, as an Arsenal fan, I've seen this before with plenty of Arteta transfers, but this one specifically has led me a little bit confused as to, I guess, the misprofiling in some of our players, and it confuses me a little bit as to why some fans are so confused about this signing. And so for me, this video is why are Arsenal signing Konsa? Because I feel like that is something that needs to be addressed. And so I think there are probably two myths, or not two myths, but two evidences or arguments against signing Konsa for the most part. I don't think people are really worried about the fee or the age as much. I think that's more small little issues that people might have, but I think people in this right now understand that you kind of have to overpay a little bit, and so the overpay is a little bit worth it, even though he's kind of old. And the age, he's still a center back, so 28 turning 29 in 2 months doesn't mean that much when he could really play at the top level until 34. But I think the two main arguments is, why are we signing Konsa when we have Mosquera, who we expected to be the Saliba backup? And second is, why are we spending so much on a center back when we can, either sign another position like a right back or left back, or, just sub in, and do that and sub in a Timber, a White, or a Rice, who we all know can play there. And so I think I just want to address these different arguments one by one. Firstly, with the Mosquera debate. I think people are seriously misprofiling Mosquera, maybe because of his technical security or his technical fluency, I would say. Mosquera is not the Saliba type of center back. He is not the calm and composed center back that doesn't jump. Mosquera at his best, I think we've seen him be tenacious, we've seen him be aggressive, and we've seen him being the one that jumps onto duels and jumps in 1v1s. However, I think his weakness is that, every so often, and, I could probably reliably say once a game, he'll make an error on the ball. Whether that's, misjudging a pass or misjudging the height of a ball, and so he loses a duel like that, or because he misplaces a pass. And we've seen it just so recently as the Community Shield. And luckily we were 3-0 up, so it didn't really matter. But I think those are the minor details that matter for winning a Premier League title. He is more of the Gabriel profile. If you look at Gabriel's strengths and Mosquera's strengths, you'd probably see them line up very similarly. I don't have the stats in front of me, but just from the eye test perspective, what is Gabriel known for? His aggressiveness, his tenaciousness, his ability to jump and win duels, his aerial strength. Mosquera, you could probably say a lot of similar things about. Maybe, you'd say Mosquera is probably better on the ball in terms of just comfortability, and that's probably because he's Spanish. But in a similar way, Mosquera is tenacious. He likes to jump. He is the aggressive type. And so that's why we've always seen that, a Gabriel Mosquera center back partnership is a little bit suspect. I'm surprised that people don't think that more, or haven't realized that, when you actually look and break down a Gabriel Mosquera partnership, for the most part, beside the City game, even if you look at, the preseason, for example, it's not the best partnership. And so I think when you're just looking at their strengths and weaknesses, it aligns very similarly. Whereas if you look at Gabriel and Saliba's strengths and weaknesses, obviously there is some overlap of strengths because, for center backs, there are some traits that you have to have. But you look at their profiles and there are some key differences as well. I mean, Saliba is the more calm, composed type. He doesn't like to jump as much. He's more of the sweeper. He doesn't really get involved in aerial duels as much. And, when pressed, he is able to make build-up solutions much easier than Gabriel does, who is, I think, known now at this point, at least we saw it a lot in the second half of the season, last season, to just boot the ball long. And so, I think when addressing that first argument, I think there just needs to be an understanding that when you look at Gabriel and Mosquera, they're actually very similar profiles. I get Mosquera's thin and he's not as physically imposing as Gabriel, so there might be that misconception, or that might lead to that misconception. But Saliba and Mosquera are very different. And so that's one reason we need to sign Konsa, is because Konsa and Saliba have much more similar attributes. And right now, Mosquera doesn't fill the Saliba backup role. He's really a Gabriel backup because he's more similar to Gabriel rather than Saliba. The second argument, which is probably a stronger argument in my opinion in terms of player profiling and what we can do with our players, is why don't we sign a right back or a left back and move some of our players around in terms of where they play? So for example, Hincapié, why can't he play as one of the 3 center backs or one of the 4 center backs, and then you get another player that's a backup to Calafiori or competes with Calafiori at left back? And the reason for that is we've seen Hincapié and Gabriel together on that left-hand side is pretty disastrous for our build-up. When we don't have Calafiori on the left-hand side, Hincapié and Gabriel are both very prone to just booting it long under pressure and kind of sometimes folding under the press a little bit. And so having both of them on one side kind of kills our build-up a little bit. And we saw that a lot the second half of the season last season when Calafiori was injured. And so in a similar perspective, I could understand why someone would want a left back to kind of alleviate that issue in case Calafiori is injured. And in the same sense, at right back, we could move a Timber or a White to a center back and sign a right back. I feel like both of those solutions, signing a right back or signing a left back, solves different things. But I think the main issue with all of those solutions is none of them are ideal. The reason is let's say you sign a left back and you move Hincapié to a center back role. The problem is then you have 3 players of a similar profile with one Saliba. So you still have the similar misprofiling that you did if you just relied on Mosquera to be a Saliba backup. The second issue is if you were to move Calafiori as a center back and buy a new left back, sure, that works, but playing 2 left footers at center back isn't really something common and isn't really something that I think Arteta wants to do or prefers to do. And I think playing Calafiori as center back really limits what he can bring to the team. And then if you look at the right back solution, Ben White is someone that's been played at center back before, and I think 2021 it was 21-22, where he played center back alongside Gabriel with Tomiyasu as our right back, and I think we finished 5th that season. Yeah. And so a lot of people are arguing, now that Ben White seems to be physically gone because of his injuries, why don't we play him at center back? My main issue here is why would we rely on a very injury-prone player to fill a position that we'll need him playing in for at least 3 to 4 months? Saliba looks like he's out till December. And so when you think about it from that perspective, you're relying on an injury-prone player to fill in for someone that is going to be out for 4 months. So you're relying on Ben White in that position as a Saliba backup every week for 3 to 4 months to be fit. And if that doesn't happen, then you're in the same conundrum of playing 2 very similar center backs at the same time as your pairing, Mosquera and Gabriel. And I think that becomes an issue. As well, playing Timber as your center back instead doesn't really make sense because, well, first of all, Timber's probably out until mid-September. That's what I've heard, but it might be later than that, knowing, Timber's injuries recently. And so you're going to have to start the season and what will be a month of the Prem, so probably 4 or 5 games with that Gabriel Mosquera partnership. And then after that, same point with Ben White, you're going to be relying on injury-prone Timber for 3 to 4 months, playing game in, game out as that central center back. And again, I don't think that makes sense for someone that's just come off of a long spell of injuries. And so I just think that's honestly negligent to rely on Ben White and Timber to fill in that center back and right back roles, even if you sign a new right back. And so then the final option is, what about Declan Rice? Well, we all want Declan Rice to be rested for a lot of the first half of the season, and we want his minutes to be managed. However, if you're playing him at center back, like I said with Ben White and Timber, you're going to be relying on him an awfully a lot. And so again, for the minutes argument, it doesn't really make sense. And even if you want to ignore the minutes argument and say, play our best players, if he wants to play, let him play. Okay, fine. But the problem is that even when you look at their profiles, Rice is probably the closest to a central center back profile that we have in the squad currently outside of Saliba. But the issue is that his probably his biggest flaw in the game, it's overstated, but it is his biggest flaw, is his ball progression. And so when you're looking at Saliba, who's, one of our two chief ball creators in our starting back four with Calafiori, and you're replacing that with someone that isn't the best at progressing the ball, alongside someone that can easily be pressed into booting it long, you have two center backs that have their own flaws in terms of ball progression. And in the modern game, all your ball progression comes from your goalie and your back line. A lot of it coming from your goalie and your center backs. And so when you have two players that each have their own flaws, despite being, elite players, every player has their flaw. When you have two players that both have flaws in the build-up, you're asking for terror in terms of your build-up solutions. And so when you factor in all of that, why does Konsa make sense? Konsa makes sense because he is a Saliba type profile and he is reliably fit, and thus he'll be able to hold down that center back position until Saliba comes back. And what's even better is he has experience at right back as well. So when Saliba does come back, he can be a backup for Saliba, but he can also be a mainstay at right back. Oh, sorry about that. And so because he's competent at two positions, has experience at two positions, and is a similar profile to Saliba, I think it all adds up. And then when you look at the age profile of that position, you have a 28-year-old turning 29-year-old, you have a 24, 25-year-old, and then you have a 16-year-old. And so when that 29-year-old is ready to be phased out, well, boom, you have this 16-year-old that will probably be 18, 19, ready to be phased in. And so logically, from a squad building perspective, does that not make sense? To me, it does. And yes, it is a bit of an overpay. For me, it should have been 40, 45 tops. 51 plus add-ons is a little bit uncomfortable, but this is the market. And unfortunately, I don't mind us overpaying 5 to 10 million pounds to get the players and the profiles we need. Well, let me know if you guys agree, disagree, what you guys think in the comments. Let me know. Like, share, and subscribe. Take care.